out live. But here we go. Three, two. Welcome to another episode of Million Dollar Stories, where we get to interview authors from all over the world. I love talking to authors because they have the courage to take their thoughts, their stories, their lessons, put it down in a book, and share it with the many, ultimately changing their legacy and destiny in the process. And if you're an entrepreneur out there, I highly recommend you write a book. The self-awareness that you get, the clarity, but also the opportunities that come your way. It's incredible to see whenever I work with people and putting books out there. Who they become in the process. So if you need help with that, check out dreamstarterspublishing.com. And let's say you already have a book done. Check out bookmarketingcrm.com. You can use the book as a lead generator for that business. And as you know, if you guys have followed along in this podcast, I was about to join the Navy out of high school, follow my dad and my grandfather in their footsteps. But I met a millionaire and he gave me some insight on how to create wealth. And he got me a job, and then he said, "Hey, you should go to Duquesne University, and I'll help you get your feet pointed in the right direction when it comes to entrepreneur stuff." So I went away from going into the military to kind of follow the footsteps of this entrepreneur. However, I have a very high regard for anybody in the military, and we have a lot of clients that are part of the military, and they help people create wealth based off of what they've learned in the military. So I think that if you are into that world in any capacity, you're going to like this episode. The book that we're talking about is called Military Money: How to Thrive on a Government Salary. And we have the author with us today, Trevor Nolan. Thanks so much for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story with you and with your audience.
Well, let's start off with the genesis. Before we hit the record button, I kind of know a little bit about your background, but give us a quick little glimpse of where you come from, what got you here, and why you wrote this book.
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity. Like I said, yeah, so my background is pretty typical when you're talking about military folks. I had some military members in my family. My grandfather served in the Air Force. His brother was a Korea War veteran in the Navy. My mom served for a brief stint in the Navy. My uncle was in the Coast Guard. And, coming out of a family lineage of service, military is always not necessarily forefront in your mind, but it's something that is ingrained in you, right? You see, everyone in my family did one or two tours and got out, and all led very successful lives, either in the public sector or continuing to serve either through nonprofit service or through, church service or whatever that is. And I think a lot of those characteristics and traits were ingrained in them from the military. And so they brought that back to our family, and that was a catalyst for all of us. And so growing up, I knew, I was a Catholic kid, I was an altar boy, I was, all of these things, was introduced to service early. And I knew that I was more interested in the extracurriculars at school, the student government, the sports, than I was in really the hardcore academia. And so I don't know if it was an easy button for me, but it was always on the radar to transition from some point from education into service full-time through military service. And so what I did is upon completion of my undergraduate at San Jose State University in San Jose, California, I commissioned as a second lieutenant through the ROTC program into the United States Air Force. And in 2022, I completed a 21-year career.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for your service, man. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
thanks. I really appreciate it. It was an honor to serve, truly.
Well, we talk a lot about this on the podcast, but the school system doesn't teach you about money and how to make it last, or maybe even how to create more of it, right? How to get your money working for you. And, you talk about debt investments and, even things like dating and marriage when it comes to military money. So tell us a little bit about maybe the principles that you share in the book, or maybe what you realized while you were in there. The education is just not being emphasized on how to, I guess you say, build wealth in every aspect, but maybe even just when it comes to military, that people who join the military, maybe they have the pension, but they're lifers, they do the 20 years. And so I don't know if they're teaching the wealth creation aspect, but I'm assuming maybe that's what you're doing in this book. So what are some of the principles you'd like to share?
Absolutely. And I will tell you, Mike, you are spot on when you say that we don't educate our youth, especially in K through 12, on the importance of money as a tool. I think we just ingrain in our children to a large extent that you will trade time for money until you are very old, and then there will be Social Security, right?
Yeah, right.
And
That's it.
that's not a winning formulation, right? I mean, the formula doesn't compute. And so I'll tell you, like any organization, you are going to be as good as your mentors along the way. So I really need to shout out all my mentors. I could have had completely different assignments in the military and not learned the life lessons that I learned that became the principles for military money. And I'll tell you, more than a textbook, this is, if for your listeners, I hope they reach out and read it, and I'll talk about, towards the end, how to get a copy of it. But these are my failures. Every chapter starts with how I did this incorrectly, but how I was able to right the ship along the way and still accumulate money, enough money to where I could do anything on this side of the uniform. And so when I was looking at those principles, I wanted to look from a military lens, specifically at the things that men and women in the military are faced with every day when it comes to every time they reach into their wallet or to their phone for, Google Pay or Apple Pay. Anytime you're going to do a transaction with currency that you earned from service, I wanted to be able to provide an example of how you can do it wrong, pitfalls to avoid, how I did it wrong, and then better ways to do it, and how I was able to create wealth through making some better decisions. So specific topics are like, you move every couple of years. So housing is a big one. We turn over a lot of vehicles in the military, again, because maybe you can't take it overseas, or maybe you buy one overseas for some tax breaks. Other things like consumer goods. Do you buy something that's really expensive so it will last you throughout your a couple of assignments or your entire career? Or do you just know that the movers are probably going to break it? And so maybe a throwaway, power tool is better than a high dollar power tool at any one point in time. So that was really the lens from which I wrote the chapters.
Well, I love the way you wrote this book. I mean, chapter one, you start talking about Old School, one of the greatest movies ever, right? So, you're talking about housing, moving constantly. And maybe there's an advantage to some of this stuff, right? Where you might be able to save more money. Or we were working with an individual who was in the special forces, and he thought to himself, wow, you know what? We move so much. What if I get into real estate and I offer housing rentals for specific special forces people, right? Niche down. So maybe there's these gaps, or maybe there's some advantages when it comes to this. And maybe that's what you're talking about in chapter one with housing.
Yeah. So you like you said, you move all the time. And so, there's apartments, there's condos, there's, large single family homes. There's a lot of different ways that you can approach it. And it looks a little bit different if you have kids and you're shopping for school districts than it does if you're kind of younger and maybe, newly married, or you're a single person as you're transitioning from location to location. And I'll tell you, I just happened to run into somebody when I was very young who bought a house. I'm like, how did you buy this house? Because one of my buddies was one of his roommates. And, coming out of college, it's very common to a couple of folks split a house, and, the roommates all split the rent. And he had sort of taken that into his professional career. And I was like, I guess I had a mental block that what we did in college, have a couple of roommates to afford a house that's close to campus. I never had really thought that I could do that as a professional. And, when you're having 2 or 3 roommates in a 4-bedroom house and they're paying more than your mortgage and you're making a housing allowance, man, you could really start to accrue some money really fast. And, some people, it's not for everyone, right? If you're an extreme introvert or germaphobe, or you just don't like loud noises, there are things that maybe that's not where you go to make your money, but it's a good place to make money, and I, by happenstance, bought houses at many of the assignments I was stationed at. And I did not run it as a business. I didn't know. I just knew that I didn't want to sell it, and that I had enough money in case the renter didn't pan out that I could cover it for a few months. And I don't really know how I lucked into that, but gosh, I really did. And so as I was transitioning, 15, 17 years into my career, and I said, okay, now I need to start doing some lifestyle design. That FIRE movement was really big. So I was eating up everything I could about, how do I get financial independence and retire early? I want cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. I realized I had all this equity like tied up in these rental properties. And so it was with a little bit of guidance and some mentorship, a couple of assignments before my last assignment, where I met some folks that were really doing it. and they guided me to where I am.
Wow. Fire. Yeah. Uh, Financial independence, retire early. That acronym. Yeah, I've heard that before. Um, Something that you bring up, I have not read this book, but access to cash, from what I gathered from working with some of our clients, there's a lot of opportunity. Once you leave the military, you can borrow money to maybe either start that business or get into real estate or invest. So access to cash. Can you give us some insight what you've seen and maybe some of the benefits of having that military background when it comes to this?
This is a great question and one that I'm working on all the time right now. So, one of the things I do as a volunteer service is I work with the Veteran Business Outreach Center, which takes veteran entrepreneurs, puts them on a business plan, and connects them with access to cash and capital and mentors so that they can become solvent and build their own businesses. That is a function of the Small Business Administration, specifically for veterans. And Colorado Springs, where I'm joining you from today, was just awarded one. They just had their 1 year anniversary. So I helped teach there at that course. And so access to cash is so important. And in fact, that's what I'm doing my PhD research on. So as a PhD researcher, I am really focused on economic development and access to capital for veteran entrepreneurs, what I call vetrepreneurs, which I did not coin that term. Another PhD coined that term, but I love it, right? You take your traits, you take your abilities, and you build those, and you just go headlong into entrepreneurship using all of these skills that you've been given through the military. From
Wow.
some of my preliminary research, how are you getting outpaced by your civilian contemporaries? When I'm talking about that, I mean other business owners, non-veteran business owners. Well, what do? When you're, you know, on active duty, they're going and getting their MBA. And that MBA program has a lot of business teachers, business school professors. It has a lot of maybe VC firms associated with that school of business. It has a lot of ways to build a network to go get access to large figure sums in order to start up businesses or to maybe work in M&A early if you have some good IP. I know I'm using a lot of acronyms. Merger and acquisition, or if you bring to the table some intellectual property. So forgive me for that. That's a career in the military using acronyms for everything. So I'll try to
Oh,
stay.
I've noticed. Yeah, trust me. Yeah, it's just natural, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But we don't have that. When you're in the military, you're in your late teens, 20s, 30s, in some case, your young 40s, and you don't have that business acumen per se because you've been out becoming a master of defense, whatever your branch of the military, whatever your job was in defense. So when you're trying to access capital as an entrepreneur, there are some great programs, and I'm learning and teaching about them all the time. So the SBA, through this VBOC, the Veteran Business Outreach Center, talks veterans onto banks that are SBA lenders specifically for veteran entrepreneurs. And that is a great resource. So I would push anyone, and we're not the only one in Colorado Springs that has these. There's VBOCs, Veteran Business Outreach Centers, all over the United States. So find your local one, and they will help you talk onto cash. What else is there? There's another GI Bill. It's almost like a GI Bill, but it's underneath the Department of Veterans Affairs, and it's called VR&E. It used to be called VOC Rehab, Vocational Rehabilitation. Now it's called VR&E, which is, I don't know, some acronym, Vocational Rehabilitation and Education. They have a program that is like a GI Bill that will really fund a startup for an entrepreneur. And that is a lesser known, if not extremely unknown. These aren't the things that you get taught when you're on active duty, right? And that is a big chapter from mine is you need to invest in your civilian self when you're on active duty because God willing, you will be a civilian much longer than you were ever in the military. And so you need to invest in your civilian self.
Great
And
point
access to
there.
cash is one of them.
There's that next chapter you need to start planting the seeds for right away. And that
Mhm.
may sound counterintuitive, right? Be all in where you're at. But I heard one of our clients say that, yeah, it was all about creating the new identity the moment he left that door or walked through that door from being, a government employee. So he had everything set up so it wasn't a bad transition because that's one of the reasons why people struggle with depression and maybe identity problems because they were this killer, right? This badass for so many years. They had their purpose, and it would be like you're an athlete and you're the best athlete when you're 18 to 22, but what do you do when you're 23? Because if you're not turning pro, where do you go from there? And you lose that sense of purpose. So if you don't start planting those seeds now, you will suffer. And I love how you said that. You start planning your civilian life when you're on active duty. And that's probably tough for some people to grasp.
I'll tell you, you bring up a really sensitive subject, one that I work with a lot of transitioning vets on. So I also help at our transition assistance program, which is a required class that all transitioning service members have to go through before they separate. And the closest base that I participate at is Peterson Space Force Base here in Colorado Springs. When your identity is on your collar, or on your epaulet, that now is on a uniform that is on a hanger in your closet, it is a huge vacuum. It cannot be understated. Especially if you really loved career folks are probably the largest at risk, but I would say also combat veterans are probably also hugely at risk, where you have so much of your identity tied to your professionalism and the person to your right and your left, and maybe the name of your ship or the aircraft you flew or supported or worked on. All of these things are your every single fiber. And when you hang that on a hanger and you put it in your closet and you don't even know why you're keeping it, right? But you do. And when you lose that identity and then you think wholeheartily, really, that you're going to find that same fulfillment in your next job that you work for a paycheck, you're putting an impossible situation in front of you, one that you can only lose. And with that comes a lot of depression or turn to negative things, right? Whether that's, whatever it is. Everyone deals with stress in their own ways. But I will tell you that there's also a lot of veteran service organizations that provide the type of help that you need as well, because that's not just access to capital, right? It may be access to mental health. It may be access to other outlets where you can still go and feel that camaraderie that you're missing, that you need, where someone relies on you and you can rely on them, because that's a huge thing. So when I talk to transitioning veterans, I really say, hey, I understand that you have a blank sheet of paper in front of you, and on that piece of paper, you're going to write the story of your civilian life, and it's going to say, I'm going to work this many hours and I want this pay. But that is one of what I think is about 3 pieces of paper that you need to be writing simultaneously, right? So you need to write 3 chapters of your own civilian book. One of them is an employment book. How are you going to trade time for money? And you really need to know what the answer is and work what we call target back. You know how much. Everyone is not going to become a billionaire no matter how much they work. But at this stage in your life, how much money it takes to live a comfortable lifestyle, to save enough for maybe kids' college, or to, achieve the things you want to achieve, maybe own outright a single family home in a city that you want to live in, and, a college fund, whatever. Okay, cool. Well, there's a number associated with that. And that's not a hard math problem. You can go and figure out how much you need to make. And then to make any more of that, the rate of return on you personally is terrible, right? This is where you need to look at that second piece of paper, and you need to say, okay, I need to invest in myself, whether that's academically, spiritually, keep my health, right? Very good, because you're normally in the best shape of your life, and then you just stop working out like all of a sudden, right? And so you need to invest in yourself, because if you're not around to enjoy the rest of your life, then why do you earn any money? And so you really need to fill out that chapter. And then the last chapter is fulfillment. What is it? What are you going to replace your military service with that's going to give you that same drive, that same, sense of, appreciation coming and going, where you're really providing a better future, not just for yourself, but for others? How are you lifting other people up? And I'm telling you, none of those really fit on any other page. Each page needs to exist independently, and that's how you create life balance on the other side of the uniform. That's kind of the method I came up with. I'm sure there's others, but you can't just think that, oh, I'm going to go make my first $200,000 a year and I'm going to feel fulfilled and my whole life's going to be great. It doesn't really work like that.
Is that why you see a lot of vets maybe start businesses? I mean, maybe I'm in this bubble, but I see a lot of them get into real estate. And maybe there's that sense of purpose that comes back to them where they're able to say, wow, we took a lot of these skills from the military and we can apply them here when it comes to routine and habits and being able to trudge through bullshit, but also to keep going until the mission is complete. So have you noticed a lot of these individuals start businesses? And if that's the case, what kind of businesses are they starting?
The real estate is a good one, and I do see a lot of my previous contemporaries, my bros and my sisters, like a lot of them do turn to real estate, and I'll tell you why. There's a couple of reasons why real estate's great. Is there's real estate in every state, so and you can sort of do it not just where you got out of the military from, but you can go pick an area that may be ripe. And you can go and farm that, right? You can go and either, list or, get your real estate license and, become a listing agent, become a seller's agent, become, or you can start to, like I did, you create or amass a portfolio of single family homes or multifamily homes and become a professional property manager where you're a little bit more hands off, but you're getting a lot of residual income. I also think a great thing the military teaches us about is to be forever students. And I will say that real estate is one of those that you can continue to learn and constantly realize that there's just so many different ways to make money. But what are some other reasons why veterans are turning to entrepreneurship? Number one is, and this might sound bad to some of your listeners, but it's hard to go work for civilians when they just don't feel you. Like it is. They haven't been there. They don't get it. And maybe they're a little bit like intimidated by you, or maybe they're like, oh, you don't know anything. You've been out playing bang bang while we've been in here grinding, trying to, get more capex or greater market share. You haven't been here, right? You don't know anything, right? You're starting from zero. So I think there's a little bit of lack of appreciation for what skills veterans do bring into the marketplace, which is why a lot of them end up just kind of working for defense. But what are some other things that people are called to? Well, all sorts of things. Like, so through this VBOC, I've met folks that they want to one gentleman that I'm working with, he wants to do a rural feed store because he grew up rural. He understands ag. He was in FFA as a kid, and now he wants to go back and get some land and run a feed store. And I'm like, that's a great idea. I've worked with somebody that they love beekeeping. I also love beekeeping. I have all these random
That's fascinating.
hobbies.
I'm starting to learn about beekeeping through a client. It's
It's so
unbelievable. Yeah.
important for the world. It really is. Like, what a great investment. And if you have that investment mindset, that entrepreneurial mindset, you have to appreciate pollinators. So anyway, now I got turned on to this Hives to Heroes. So me and a buddy of mine who's still on active duty, we host and train veterans that want to become, beekeepers. And so there's
Do you know Steve Jimenez? Do you know him at all?
I don't,
Oh,
but we'd
okay.
love to connect. So afterwards, we'll have to
Yeah.
get connected. But so I've met people, and what's great is I love when it's not defense related. When people want to go start a business because they've always had that thing in the back of their head that's saying, "Hey, you'd be really good at this," or "You have an amount of interest in this." And you could be really, really good. I love those ones. I worked with a guy who's a heavy truck operator in the Army here at Fort Carson, which isn't here in Colorado Springs. And he's like, I want to buy a couple of trucks and he really wanted to work for like Frito-Lay or Coca-Cola or one of those bigs and just get a route and just do that because he understood logistics and dropping off things in different locations. And I was like, brother, you need to start your own. So he bought a couple of trucks. We got him an SBA loan. He bought a couple of trucks. Now, some of these bigger companies subcontract to him. So he's a 1099 to some of these large companies, but he's not an employee to them. He's an employee to himself. And now he can bring other drivers, other buddies of his along, right? And that's the best part about being an entrepreneur is you can create lanes where you can bring your bros and sisters from active duty along with you and show freedom for them. I do some consulting. I've brought a number of my friends that I serve with into consulting. Now that is a little bit, very adjacent to defense and what we did. But when you have a security clearance, the money's just too easy. And there's a part in my book about if you have a security clearance, there's a lot of money to be had if you want to go into consulting. Mm-hmm.
So we talked a little bit about how there are a lot of characteristics that transcend military and go into the entrepreneur space. I just think the ability to maybe stay positive whenever things look really dark, or being able to keep fighting whenever nothing looks too positive, whatever. But I also thought to myself, they always will make great entrepreneurs. But then I've interviewed enough people from the military, and what they said to me is pretty common that in the military, we're not there to promote ourselves, right? So we're not there to keep getting on camera and be the loudest person in the room because that makes you usually weak, right? And so, especially if they're in certain parts of the military where you do not want to even be known, it's tough to become a marketer. and getting on camera and maybe explaining some stories when some things are so sensitive or you're not even allowed to talk about it. So it feels weird. Do you see that some people struggle with that? And if so, how do you help them overcome that? Because when it comes to entrepreneurship, you really need to be out there, outspoken, front and center to some degree. And sometimes they struggle with that. Do you see it? And is there a way to help them out with that?
I absolutely see it. And whoever, did you write all your own questions? These are great questions. So, because
It's
you're
just
hitting on
questions I'm curious about. Yeah.
so many good topics, and this is an amazing one. So, yes, is the answer. So, I worked in classified programs my entire career, right? 21 years. I couldn't tell anybody really what I did. Oh, I do something with satellites, or I do something with stealth aircraft, or I do something with special operations, right? Like, you can't really actually tell anybody what you do for a living. And now all of a sudden, like you said, if you want to go into the entrepreneurial space, well, you need to demonstrate that you are good at what you're now doing, and that you are going to take your traits like failing forward, and not, failure is not an option, right? Mission complete, solvency, market cap growth, whatever it is. And yeah, it's hard. And so how do you kind of come out of your shell? How do you have your big, your moment in the sun? I have a great mentor. His name's Chip Frazier, and he retired from the Army a couple years before I retired from the Air Force, and he took me under my wing, or under his wing as I was transitioning. He said, print up 10 copies of your resume and go to a job fair. And I was like, why would I do that? Like, I do not want to do that. Like, that sounds awful. And he's like, you're going to get a big dose of learning how to be comfortable when it is very uncomfortable. And there is, because, we don't really do resumes. So like I waited tables before I joined the military. Right. And then I had, over 2 decades of service. So now here I am, number one, don't really know how to write a resume that well, although there's a lot of services for it. And your whole life is on this single piece of paper, and you want to be a good civilian, and you want to say, hey, I'm worth your time, at least having a conversation. I would love to sit down and have coffee. I would like to do anything. And then you get there and you see all these people dressed like this, right? Standing in lines at the Lockheed table, at the Northrop Grumman table, at, pick a large defense contractor, and you're waiting in line so that somebody in HR will like your piece of paper versus someone else's piece of paper. And I have never felt more uncomfortable and more devalued in my entire existence. Well, one story that I did feel more devalued when I was on active duty, but that's for another time. But it is so, you're like emperor with no clothes on, right? You're coming out, you're like this, you have, senior class. Yeah, I did it. I completed an amazing career. And now you're standing in front of all these people that don't know you, and you're not wearing a single stitch of clothing. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is awful. This is terrible. And then he made me go again and again. And then I started realizing like I was seeing some of the same folks there. And even though I wasn't there for a job, I got a chance to meet veterans that needed a job. And in some cases needed a job like 2 weeks after the military because they were just such bad financial, peril.
Wow.
And so it was being able to do it enough to where I was like, okay, you know what? I know who I am. And I know that really none of this is for me. I'm building my own businesses. And then I could step back and look at all the help that other folks needed. And it was kind of like a light switch moment where I was like, oh, I know what my value is. And it's probably helping all these poor people standing in line feeling like hot garbage, and so that was, I wrote that on my third piece of paper, and it said, help transitioning veterans not feel like I did that day. And so that's really important to me.
It's so true with the statement, your mess becomes your message, right? You were able to see firsthand what the pain that you were going through. So you're like, oh, if I'm going through it, they're definitely going through it too. So I could see how I can add to their life and offer some type of service or increase their quality of life to some degree. And that could be as small as getting their resume in check, right? We're not marketers by nature, right? We have to learn to become great marketers. I don't care who you are. So as time goes on, you probably were like, wow, you know what? This person has way less of a strong resume, but they put together the words so professionally. They look so amazing on paper. I
Mm-hmm,
remember
mm-hmm.
doing that one time in college. I was with somebody, my roommate, and I know my roommate very well, but he put together this resume, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, this guy, if I saw this resume, I would hire him on the spot. He's such a great writer. but it doesn't match up with the person, right?
Mhm,
So like
mhm.
it blew me away that like certain words on a piece of paper can really make you stand out, and it could be that small, right? It's that insignificant, but just getting their foot in the door, having the confidence to share their message. It makes me think of First Blood, Rambo,
Mhm.
where he's like, I was in charge of $1 million equipment, and now I can't get a job parking cars. And it might be because some people just don't see the value, and maybe you have to help them see the value in themselves first so they can explain it to their employers, right?
That's right. And remember, there's not like, and I tell this to a lot of transitioning veterans, being in the military is a team sport. Being a civilian is an individual sport. And so you need to be able to do exactly like you're saying, Mike. You are your number one advocate, and you are the one that are ultimately responsible for. I mean, there's no one to blame but the person in the mirror when you're a civilian. Also, entrepreneurship, and I learned this, as I was transitioning into my businesses, which is you you can't be well, you can be the finance guy. I can't be the finance guy, the media guy, the person that goes and does business development, and actually the person that shows up and does the job. Entrepreneurship has a little bit of a misperception, like a misnomer, that it's an independent sport. You need a team. I'm sure you have a team of folks to
Oh my
put
God.
together. I mean, I got 15 text messages and 7 emails from you. Like, I'm sure you weren't sending those, right? Like, I'm sure
No,
you have
and
somebody
I
that
didn't
goes
even
on
set
social
up the
media.
system that did that. I had a team do that. Yeah.
That's right. And so you realize it does take a team, and there's enough money to share all that money all the way down. And I think veteran entrepreneurs probably know that better than civilian entrepreneurs. If I had to generalize, and I will find the data that will support that through my PhD research, the level between the top earners and the bottom earners in a veteran owned business, I believe that those will be much closer than they are in civilian owned businesses. And I hope to prove that because we understand the value of team. I was a military officer, but I know that I didn't get a single thing done, whether that was in operations or support or administration, without all the professional enlisted folks that helped me along the way, right? It takes the entire apparatus to be successful. You're doing it well. I think veteran entrepreneurs do it very, very well. And so that's something I need to teach as well. I don't want to go learn QuickBooks. I mean, I've learned it now, but now it's like, I don't want to go learn this other application, Canva or Trello or everything that it takes to project manage your entire life as an entrepreneur. You need a team of folks, and there's plenty of money to share all that money down, which is, something that I really enjoy teaching folks when I'm at the VBOC. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that transition from going from solo entrepreneur to having a team, all of this is just the hero's journey. It's never going to be smooth, but you have to want that because as time goes on, you're in charge of more than just yourself. So going from military individual, like you said, into civilian life, starting a business, and then growing a team, all these skill sets need to be matured as you go, and being around the right people, reading the right books, but also never stopping the pursuit of maybe how far can you take this vessel of yours. And it takes a special person for that. So you do have something here that I want to touch on: more money pits and bad decisions. And I can't believe how crazy it is to say that when people leave the military, in my opinion, whenever I'm looking at it, like, oh, they're in the military, they get paid. You're telling me that when they leave, they're in such financial disarray that they have to get a job right away. There is no break. I mean, that's pretty scary. So, what are some of the money pits and bad decisions that you can help people avoid?
Yeah. And this was about 6 months ago, a senior leader from the United States Air Force Academy, which is also here in Colorado Springs. He was a dean of one of the departments, so very senior level military officer. I sat down with him and his wife at dinner, and I was told that he needed a job about 2 weeks after he had about enough money. And so how do you get into a situation like that? And he was worried, right? He was a former aviator, he was a pilot in the Air Force, very common, but he hadn't flown in years. So it's not like he could transition into the, and go fly for Southwest or go fly for United. He couldn't go to the airlines. He had been in academia, but hadn't ever gotten his PhD. So now it's not like he can go become a professor somewhere after leaving the United States Air Force Academy. So he's like, I'm stuck. I've been a generalist for the last 10 years of my career. I really don't know what to do. And He has three grown kids, two in college, and he just spent $80,000 on his daughter's marriage. Uh, and, two late model vehicles in the driveway and an airplane. And it's like, oh, okay. Um, he's like, I need to cash flow this amount next month to make my bills.
Oh my God. And how
And
old was
so,
he? Or is he?
how old was he?
Yeah.
He was probably a couple years older than me, 47, 48 years old.
Jeez.
Yeah. And basically in not financial ruin, because he has the skills. He's a smart guy, obviously, right? To teach at one of the most prestigious universities in the United States. But it's like, golly, these are the types of things that I want to, these are the gaps that I need to fill with this book and with continuing to engage with folks on active duty as well as transitioning veterans. Is don't put yourself in this situation. Like when people are transitioning, they need to look from really, really intently 36 months out and say, okay, how's my quality of life now? How are my bills now? What can I pay off before I get out? And how much money do I need, when I get out so that I can live this same quality of life or better? And so that is, that's the mission plan. And so that's what I did, right? I said, okay, what do I need to pay off before I transition? Okay, now that those are paid off, I don't need those. Those aren't on my budget anymore. I mean, I'll show me your budget and I'll show you your financial future. I mean, ultimately, and you need to really intently 3 years out plan for the day you get out. And if you're retiring, you'll get a check and maybe there's some a secondary VA disability. If you're going back to school, maybe there's some housing allowance. But ultimately, say you did a 5 and dive, right? You did your 5 years, you served your country in your best way, and now you want to go become a civilian. You will get no money when you get out. Okay, cool. Well, then there's a number there that says, okay, in order to make your bills and to live your current quality of life, there's an equivalency pay, and that is your minimum amount of pay that you need to go get.
So
So
three
there's
years out, you said 3 years.
3 years out. And so if you plan on only doing 5 years in the military, that means pretty much once you're fully trained, you're through your technical school, you're at your first assignment, you need to start your exit strategy, which now that I'm learning a lot more about business, it's the same thing when you go to start a business. You don't start a business just to run a business. You start it for a purpose and there's an end and you're working towards that end. If you aren't, then you just bought yourself a job. And then it's no better than just going and working for somebody else. In fact, it's probably worse because you have less time in your life. You need to have an exit strategy in every financial endeavor that you take. And so, yeah, 3 years out is really what I recommend so that people can get right. They can pay down whatever they can. And then that also puts the least amount of burden on them and pressure on them as they transition. Because even if you need to go work at, something that maybe isn't your life's calling, but you can easily make your bills and it buys you some, runway, that's completely fine. There's no shame in that.
Hmm. So 3 years out, start planning that next stage, that next chapter of your life. Take away as much debt as possible, right? Be under leveraged, I guess. And so therefore you have the freedom to kind of make some mistakes along the way. Therefore, it's not going to be sleepless night after sleepless night right out of the gate. So debt, watch that. Plan the next path, which is probably, I mean, that might require personal development, reading the right books, right? And start to build some type of expertise in an area. Therefore, you are an authoritative figure from the get-go in that field.
100%. And I'll tell you, when I got out of the military, as I said earlier in the interview, I wasn't the best academic, right? I was all about, in high school, it was extracurriculars and sports. In college, it was, student government, intramural sports, fraternity, ROTC, anything but going to class, right? I really didn't understand academics until my master's degree. And then now, on this side, now I'm back in school and I'm for the first time, probably a real academic for the first time in my entire career. But you're exactly right. That second piece of paper we talked about where you're investing in yourself so that you can be excellent at something was really important to me because I didn't have any hard skills. I didn't even know what hard skills were, right? So they're taking you through these resume writing courses, they're like, okay, so you need to make sure you have a good mix of soft skills and hard skills. And I'm like, well, what are these hard skills you speak of? And they're like, oh, the things you did in college and the things you're an engineer or you're an astrophysicist or you've been working on this technology or you know how to code in Python. I'm like, oh boy, golly, well, I don't have a lot of those, right? And so I have none of those. So that's what I did. So that, during that 36 months before I got out, what did I do? Well, I went and I got a professional management certification, my PMP, and I went and I got an agile certified practitioner. And did they mean anything to anyone else? Not really, but they meant a lot to me. It meant that I could go and I could learn and I could gain a hard skill and I could put myself in the same conversation, because people are like, well, I don't need all that stuff because I know what I did in the military. I'm going to do the same thing as a contractor on the way. Okay, but you're self-eliminating, right? So you need to, any barriers where you have the opportunity to take an action and be put in the conversation versus just resting on your laurels and thinking you earned a seat at the table, it doesn't work that way as a civilian. So that was something that, again, through mentorship, they said, well, then go get them. And there's, I didn't pay for those. There's a lot of veteran service organizations that will foot the bill so that you can go get these things. So you can go get a cyber certification or an HR management certification. And do they really make you a better person? No, but you know what it does? It demonstrates that your resume is not a history document. It's a living document, and that you're a real person that is investing in their future. And that's what I tell a lot of people. I don't want to read a history document on all the things you did. I want to know who you are. And when it says, I'm taking these classes and here's my expected completion date, that to me speaks volumes. That is a veteran, right? That is someone who's a lifelong learner. And it's not that a lot of folks aren't doing this, but some people think that the finish line is when they get out of the military, their first day as a civilian. And I will tell you, I hope you have a running start into that day, because you will have a completely different outcome.
Awesome. Outside of your own book, is there one that you recommend to our audience? We always ask this question amongst our
Yeah,
guests.
so I read a ton. So I love books, but one like that you talked about for veteran entrepreneurs, because I know that your audience is principally entrepreneurs, Platform is a great book. And I'm sure that one's come up before.
Wow. I don't know that one.
You don't.
I don't think, no, I always write down books that I don't know of when people share it. That's not on this list. All right. So
Okay.
Platform, I got to check it out.
Yeah. And I'm looking up, it's in my Audible. So it's by Michael Hyatt. That's a good one.
Okay. I think I've heard of him.
And so that's a good one for entrepreneurs. I tell a lot of folks about that one. For transitioning veterans, I still like What Color is Your Parachute? That one is a bestseller a million times over. I think they're like on, I don't know, 7th or 10th edition, but it's great. It really allows you to separate yourself, and it's kind of a lot of journaling, but what it does is it really dissects you down as a person, and it says why you value the things that you do and what is important. One that I like about the gig economy, oh gosh, that's probably enough. I'll give you a list of books after this because I'm constantly eating books.
Gig economy, is that a Gary V? I'm not sure if that was a Gary
so
V.
It's not actually called gig economy. I was trying to think of it's called.
I've heard of something in regards to the gig economy, but maybe it was the thank you economy. I think that's the one he did.
Yeah, I'll have to send it to you afterwards. But it's an easy book.
Nice. And then last question I got for
Yeah.
you outside of your social media and website that you recommend, but the Penguins. What's up with the Penguins back there? I'm a Pittsburgh Penguin guy myself, so
How are you?
I'm drawn to anything Penguin related. So is there anything that you could share with us in regards to what's the point of that in the background? It must be significant.
Yeah, so I wrote a second book, and I don't know if my screen is flipped or not.
Oh, okay. This is a children's book.
That's right. Yeah, it's called The Penguin That Wanted to Be a Seal. And
that's
yeah,
awesome.
And it's in partnership with the Navy SEAL Foundation and the Special Ops Warrior Foundation, two nonprofits that I really supported when I was in special operations. And so 100% of the proceeds of my children's book goes to those two organizations, and they basically write the ticket for any. I'm talking Gold Star families. So, if their service member was killed on active duty, their kids need for nothing through those two organizations, the Special Ops Warrior Foundation and the Navy SEAL Foundation. So, and so it's a fun story about a penguin and his sidekick, this crab. And he just, they live in the same bay as these seals. And I just remember back to being a kid and having that Top Gun poster on my wall. And, there's very much like this hero worship with fighter pilots, when I was a kid. And so it's sort of based on that loosely, where this penguin has hero worship of these SEALs, just loves the whole lifestyle, and isn't able to become a SEAL, but actually achieves even a greater goal when he comes upon a boat of Navy SEALs and helps them through a mission and becomes
Wow.
a SEAL. Yeah.
I'm glad I asked you about that,
Yeah.
man. I didn't know
Thanks.
that you had another kid's book there. That's great. Okay.
Yeah.
So the penguin that wanted to become a SEAL, that's out
Yeah.
there on Amazon, or is there a
It is.
website that
Yeah.
people
And
can
on my
find this
website,
stuff
on the
on?
website, you can get the plushies as well. Yeah. So,
So smart, dude. All
yeah.
right. Yeah, you become a real marketer when it comes to this business. So the transition, it can be done and can be done at the highest level. I love that. So special operations background, all that, man, there's a few people I need to connect you with.
Yeah.
So
Anytime. I want to help anybody, anyone you want to send my way. And if there's any way I can bring them value, I definitely want to.
means a lot, man. So website, social media, how can they find you?
Lots of different ways. I like LinkedIn. And so you can go to my LinkedIn, Trevor C. Nolan. And then I also have, so like you, I have a publishing company because I had a publishing deal coming off of active duty and it all went sideways. And I was like, how hard is it to do this? So, I have an accredited through the Independent Book Publishers Association of America publishing company called Military Might Publishing. So militarymightpublishing.com. And we help veterans and active duty members get their message out, get it into print, and we don't charge anything for it. I run it as a not-for-profit. And
Wow.
yeah, and so that's a good one, militarymightpublishing.com. That's where you can get my books, and you can get any books that we've published, as well as the plushies. And then let's see what else, trevorcnolan.com. That sort of gets you to any of my socials. It's sort of just a landing page where you can click on anything and either get to my consultancy company or to anything else, my nonprofits that I'm working with. It's a great resource there. But anyone from your audience that wants to reach out, that has a heart for supporting veterans, is a veteran, or just needs someone to help them through a hard time, I am their person. And if I'm not their person, I will find a person that's their person.
It's awesome, man. I appreciate it. Once again, yeah, thank you for your service and helping other people find their way afterwards, man. I think that next chapter, it's that will help them, stay out of the bad stuff, right? You can always find these individuals who are just getting lost in addiction and maybe kind of find their way and end up in a bad place. So yeah, you definitely found your calling, man. And
Thanks.
it's an honor
If
to
you
talk with you
served,
and share this on this podcast.
yeah, thank you so much. I'll just leave your audience with this. If someone raised their right hand to protect and serve freedom, they should get to experience freedom. And so we, as not just other veterans, but we as American citizenry, should support them so that they can understand and experience what freedom really is.
Great, man. Guys, check out his book, Military Money: How to Thrive on a Government Salary, and check out his other book. And I'm going to look through here. It's called The Penguin That Wanted to Be a SEAL. It's available on Amazon, or just go to his website, check it out. And Trevor Nolan, thanks again, man.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Appreciate you.
Remember, guys, $1 million book will lead to $1 million life. Right on.